All right, hello everyone. Got another video sponsored by Squarespace here, and my name is Peter. And something cool to show you here: a cool magazine I recently got featured in by someone named Diego, who contacted me and asked me to send in some stuff, and I answered a little interview that got featured in here. I'm not really sure what exactly to call this. Maybe it's a magazine, some kind of like, it seems to me like some kind of cool underground culture magazine. I don't really want to show too much of it, obviously, because this seems like a very kind of uh, like here's a glimpse of the art I have in there and a little bit of the interview I have. I'm going to put a link in the description to where you can get a copy because I've been looking through it, and there's a lot of cool stuff about music, art, stuff I've never seen before, a wide variety of stuff too. Okay, so I just think it's a really cool project that this person's been working on. It's called Sick Day by Horrid Shop, and the person who put it all together wrote a really nice letter to me, plus some swag. Look at that. Little beanie. Yeah, that's sick. And a tote that was custom made. I think that was screen printed on there by them. Yup. And cool stickers. You know I love stickers. Look at these. Oh yeah. Sick Day Magazine, Volume 1. So go grab you a copy. Really cool work put together here. And I'm really happy to be a part of it. So thank you, Diego, for reaching out to me. And sorry I was so slow to respond. And thank you for pestering me to get back to you. Yeah. Art, photography, clothing, writing, activities, and much more. Definitely go check them out, support them. It's very cool. Okay, I would flip through it for you, but I don't want to give it out. I want you to go. I want you to go pay for it so they can make some money off all their hard work. If you know what I mean. I'm gonna put one of these stickers in my water bottle, and we'll be right back with something else. All right, so make sure you go check out Squarespace if you want to make your own website. It's a great supplementary online presence to maybe Instagram, Twitter, X. Look, it's one place on the internet where you have total control over how you're represented. You don't have to have just a little square grid gallery of Instagram. You can totally control how the gallery of your art is represented, if that's what you're trying to go for. But if you're not trying to do the art gallery, if you're trying to run a little business, it's great for that too, for attracting new clients. Your website will pop up on Google, and it's great for organizing all your orders and stuff like that. Has all these features for organizing that all automatically. So go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Peter Draws for 10% off your first website or domain. Check this out. Got this in the mail as well. It says Peter on the front. Peter, hey, hope you're doing well and having fun on your summer break. This is a sketchbook I messaged you about on Instagram with a little info about it. Cover is black lambskin over 300-pound cotton watercolor paper to give it strength without making it too bulky and rigid. I wonder if you can smell the leather. When I first bound it, the leather smelled amazing, but to my nose, the scent has faded a bit. The paper is Shizen paper, block printed in India. I saw it at a store in Kansas City, MO. I think that's Missouri, Montana. The text block is made of Fabriano Tipolo printmaking paper. It is 100% cotton, 90-pound paper that seems to take practically anything. It's really nice. I love to make sketchbooks, so I have a ton of them. I made several after watching Scott Teplin's Ooh, Scott Teplin, love him. Tutorial on sewing text blocks. Scott Teplin does make himself some amazing sketchbooks. I haven't used this sketchbook because I find I prefer really big sketchbooks. As much as I love how it turned out, I think it should be used by someone who uses smaller sketchbooks since it takes pencil and ink so well. I thought of you. Really cool sticker here. It looks like a custom doodle. It says Kelly Scott in there. This little drawing. It's fairly preserved. It's like a little drawing sticker. Wow. I can smell the leather. Wow, look at this. It's very cool. The leather is incredibly soft and supple. Amazing. Wow. Look at the inside here. It has these gold triangles. Black, gray, and white. That's a beautiful touch. I did not expect that. Really cool textures here. Wow. Well, I didn't expect to open this right now. I kind of have my brain set on drawing in this other sketchbook. I feel bad for not using this sketchbook immediately, but I will, because, you know, that's one of the reasons why I like using sketchbooks is because I like filling them up. You know what I mean? But that just motivates me to fill this one up even faster so that I can start on another one. That's the scary thing about getting a nice handmade sketchbook like this that's had so much love and effort put into it, is it makes it a little scarier to start, right? Oh my goodness. Look, my hand's even shaking. It might be from the coffee though. I'm telling myself I'm going to have to think about what to do with this sketchbook, but that will probably make it even worse and make it more anxious what to do with it. But stand by. I'm keeping it right here on hand. It's beautiful and incredible and amazing, and it does still smell like leather. So thank you. We will be coming back to that sketchbook soon, hopefully. In some of these videos, I've been doing one or two or three drawings in a sketchbook at a time. So hopefully it will fill up pretty quick. Then we can move on to another sketchbook and more drawings as always. All right, let's go. Thank you again, Kelly. It's beautiful. All right, so like I said in a previous video, I've been taking some art history classes recently. Also, my previous video was about the new Peter pen that just came out. Make sure you go grab that. It's clear with black engravings all around the barrel of a doodle that I designed, seamlessly wrapped, and you get a complimentary included custom little mini sketchbook. Link in the description. Anyways, what I want to say is I've been taking an art history class about the art of ancient Rome, and I finished the first chapter the first week of the class, and I wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about it before I get into the next chapter, because I had this slight fear that some of the information will get pushed out by the new information, and there was some interesting stuff in there. It's as interesting as you make it. You know what I mean? If you care, then you care, and I've decided to, it's interesting. That's what I've decided. Sometimes I get hesitant about talking about things that I learn, because if I learn one thing, then it makes you realize that there's like 10 other things that you don't know. So then I'm afraid to talk about it, because I'm like, what if I get something wrong or I leave something out? Look, I just have to push that worry aside. Otherwise, I'll never talk about anything interesting and worthwhile, right? So just keep that in mind. I'm fully aware that I might be missing things, because this is obviously a heavily long time studied and it's
everyone's been talking about this for centuries. Rome, it's extremely popular. Anyways, so what comes before Rome is what we've been talking about for the first chapter, like a little bit of an introduction. Is before you can talk about Roman art, is like the prelude is this civilization called the Etrurians. So once upon a time, there was this peninsula called Italy, and I'm sure they didn't call it Italy then. I don't know when it got the name Italy, and there's a little island down by the tip of the boot called Sicily. There was a lot of similar stuff going on there that was happening in Italy because it's just kind of right there, pretty close nearby. So the Etrurians are one of the main predecessors to the Romans, and we have to study them because a lot of the things that the Etrurians did ended up being things that the Romans did. But a lot of things that the Etrurians did, they did because they were heavily influenced by the Greeks, of course. So, of course, the Greeks are across the Aegean Sea to the east, and a lot of, maybe around, I think, 750 BCE, a lot of Greek people were sailing across the Aegean Sea and settling in cities in Sicily and Italy for various reasons, maybe because they wanted to start a trading post, or they wanted to do some farming, or because they were in political exile, all sorts of different reasons. So this new area in Italy, this area of Greece, was called Magna Graeca, and it was just, they were like Greek city-states. They were independent from Greece. They weren't under like Greek rule. They were just kind of doing their own thing. And a similar thing was going on with Etruria, which was more northern in Italy. And the Etrurians, obviously, I think they called themselves the Ravenna. This is another situation in which, the winners write history. I think the Romans or whoever wrote the history just called them Etruscans because they came from Etruria, and I think it's where modern day Tuscany got its name. So there are these. The Etruscans had similar city-states, individual city-states, where they were like ruling themselves. They had a lot of things in common, like their culture and religion, and a lot of similar ideas and art styles and stuff like that. But the fact that they were so fragmented is one of the things that made it so easy for Rome to assimilate them into the Roman Empire later, because they weren't a cohesive whole. But one of the things we looked at is just the way that the Etruscans were absorbing ideas from the nearby Greeks that came over and taking these ideas about art and culture and mythology and religion and making them their own with their own twist. For example, when the Greeks came over, they started making their own temples, of course. Greeks are famous for their temples. They're long and narrow. Earlier temples were like a ratio of like 3-to-1 length to width. Later on, about 2-to-1 length to width. Over in the Greek mainland, they're more often made of marble, and there wasn't as much marble over in Italy, I guess. They're more often made of limestone over in Italy. However, while the Etruscans did make similar temples with pillars and stuff, the Etruscan temples were often more square and squat, and there's not any really Etruscan temples left over because the Etruscans never made their temples out of stone. They made all their temples out of wood and mud brick, terracotta, timber beams and stuff like this. Their temples, like I said, were more square in shape, more squat. They had big wide roofs so that the roofs would overhang the walls more to protect the walls from the water coming down. And the Greeks were more likely to put their statues in the pediment of the temple, which is the big triangle at the top that the roof forms. The Etruscans, on the other hand, would put their statues up on the roof line, the ridge line of the roof. And they would make their statues from terracotta usually, which is like dried mud or clay. Also, a lot of the time you'd see these statues that would feature Greek mythology, but comparing the statues to contemporary Greek statues, even things that were pretty nearby, the Etruscan statues would look much more dynamic and animated. The Greek statues were almost always nude, but the Etruscan statues would have clothes on with all these details and decorations. And also, since terracotta was more of an additive sculpting process, you could get much more different poses with like arms out. Also, this meant the arms often broke off and stuff. But, and like the statues would be taking big, exciting strides. And then the Greek statues just be kind of standing there solemnly and doing less exciting things. But they were all similar in much ways, in the ways that like the muscles were formed, sharp shin bones, and everyone painted their statues back then. I think that's an interesting thing that we don't usually get a good idea of when we look at these statues. Like, we have all these ancient Greek statues and some Etruscan statues, and they're all just kind of monocolor, but apparently they were all painted, I guess, vibrantly. But the paint is long gone. Anyways, even before the Etruscans, there was another civilization, the Proto-Etruscans, known as the Villanovan civilization. And this is where the Etruscans got some ideas about making things like tombs, because the Villanovans put their dead people in cinerary urns. They would burn their dead people up, put them in an urn, a biconical urn, meaning it was a cone, two cones on top of each other, facing each other, kind of like a top. Sometimes they put if it was like a famous warrior, they'd put like a bronze helm on the top for a lid. And then they started getting fancy with these urns and making the urns out of rough clay, and they'd make the urns look like little Villanovan houses. The urns were still small, you could still hold them in your hands, but they make the urns look like little houses. And then this later, I think, gave the ideas for the Etruscans to actually start making tombs. They called them tumuli, or the singular would be a tumulus, which would be these tombs hewn out of the rock, dug down to the ground, and then they would carve out the insides to actually look like their own living room, with like wood beams carved into the ceiling out of the rock, and little chairs and decorations on the walls. And basically this was only the rich people could afford these. Also, they had necropoli, or they put all these tumuli in a necropolis because there were laws about not being able to bury people inside the city proper. So they had to make all these tombs. I guess it's kind of a graveyard, but if you're making a little house to put all your dead people in, I guess it does kind of become a city of the dead, which is what necropolis means. And so they got that idea of putting when the Villanovans put the ashes of a dead person in a little model house, they're like, hey, we could actually not burn our dead people, just bury them in a little house that we dig out in the ground, but a not so little house, like an actual full-size house that we dig out. Anyways, that's an interesting development, I think. In some areas, they would dig them out and sculpt the walls like that. In some areas, they would just paint the walls very vibrantly. And it's because these tombs were sealed away for so many years that so many of these paintings survived. And it's why a lot of the things that we have left over from the Etruscans is their tombs. And they also came up with this idea of sarcophagi. Sarcophagus means flesh eater, I think, which is kind of metal. And this is something that they did a lot different than the Greeks too, because the Greeks pretty much always just buried their dead people in simple graves with a headstone or a statue. They wouldn't put remains of people inside a sculpture, usually, which is what a sarcophagus is. That's a totally different idea. Also, a different thing that the Etruscans did from the Greeks is they were a lot more, I don't know if you'd say liberal with their ideas around women. For example, in a lot of the paintings on these tomb walls, or in the images on the sarcophagi, everyone liked doing these images of banquets where they had these reclining couches with people eating at banquets. And a lot of the times in classical Greek images, it was always only men at these banquets, and the women were always staying home, right? The women weren't a part of the social life. But in Etrurian art, so often you'd see men and women laying together on these banquet couches, either you could see this painted on the walls of the tumuli or on the tops of these sarcophagi, and you'd even see the man and the woman's name engraved on the sarcophagi. All of this was very un-Greek. But they were still getting a lot of things from the Greeks, like the way they were modeling a lot of the statues and stuff like that. So it was cool to see how they were kind of picking and choosing things to take from the Greek culture around them. Oh, another thing I forgot to say about the Etrurian temples is that these temples had a distinct front, unlike the Greek temples. I think the Greek temples always faced east. The Etrurian temples always faced south. And all these temples were similar in the sense that the temples weren't for worshiping inside of. The inside of the temples, they would have a small room on the inside called a cella. I think that's how you pronounce it, Cella. And this is where you would put a statue of the deity or whatever. So it's just a house for the statue of the deity. All the worshiping and sacrificing, all the priests and worshipers would just stand out in the front of it and do all the exciting stuff out there. But the Greek temples just had they had pillars all the way around, like a colonnade of pillars. But the Etrurian temples had a distinct front, one little staircase going up the front. The Greek temples had stairs all the way around. Sometimes a lot of the Etrurian temples had only pillars in the front, making a deep porch called a pronaos. And sometimes they had 3 inner rooms for 3 different deities in the Etrurian temples. The Greek temples only had 1, usually. Also, looking at some of these sculptures that the Etrurians made, I know it's hard to... We looked at a lot of different specific art pieces, so it's hard to address all of these when I'm not showing you examples visually. But there was one that jumped out at me as being particularly interesting because there was one called... there was a centaur sculpture, which is a Greek mythological being, I think. And this is an early idea of a centaur. Well, usually we think of a centaur being like the torso, like the back and front legs of a horse, and then like the torso of a man on the top of the front of the horse, right? This one was a whole body of a man, and then like on the man's back, coming out of the man's back was the back of a horse. So it was kind of like flip-flopped a little bit. So he had man legs and feet in the front. It looked kind of interesting. Yeah. And of course it was a Etrurian sculpture, but it had very kind of Greek proportions, because this is around the time, when they were all obsessed. The Greeks were, the way they sculpted made their temples and made their sculptures and everything. They were obsessed with all this stuff from Pythagoras about balance and symmetry and proportion. It was all so important to them. It was a lot less important to the Etrurians. A lot of the sculptures they put on top of their sarcophagi and on top of their temples and stuff, it was more about emotion and animation. Anyways, I think around the 5th century, beginning of the 5th century or something, BCE, things started to go downhill for the Etrurians. Before that, they had started to become very, very successful and wealthy, because they had started to export metal, like silver, metal, copper, tin, iron, and a lot of them started selling that. They were like rich merchants amongst them. They had started importing things from the Near East, from Egypt. A lot of their art started to represent these things and represent and imitate these things they were importing. A lot of, you see these, start to see these things that they're being buried with, like huge, gaudy, oversized jewelry, too big to even be worn, things that just yells nouveau riche, like, hey, look at all this stuff, I'm being buried with it, taking it into the afterlife. It's so big it's useless, right? Anyways, around the turn of the 5th century, I think, Rome started to crack down the Etrurians. They banished the last Etrurian king. They started to take over Etrurian lands, and it kind of broke their spirit a little bit. It didn't mean they stopped creating art, but you can see a distinct change. There's it starts to be a decrease in the amount of decorated tombs that you see, and a lot of the decorations that you do see, there's a much more somber tone there. Before, looking at the paintings inside a lot of these tombs, it was kind of like a celebration of life, right? People were partying in these images, and one thing heavily represented in Etrurian art that was never an emphasis in Greek art was landscape. Like there would be birds, the ground, trees. That stuff is usually just people and maybe furniture in Greek art. Anyways, people started to look really sad and grim and have blank faces again as it went into like the 4th and 3rd century in Etrurian art, as they made even more sarcophagi and cave and tomb paintings. You could just kind of get the vibe that they were like, they felt kind of spiritually and mentally defeated. That's kind of what I was getting from it. But they were still making art, I guess, so that's good. And they were still kind of giving it their own twist, even though it kind of felt like to me a lot of it was starting to feel a little bit more Greek. I don't know. It was kind of sad to watch. Anyways, moving on towards, around 90 to 70 BCE, one of the last major Etrurian pieces of art is a big bronze sculpture of a man named Olli Metelli, also called the Orator. He looks distinctly Roman, all right? He's got a big Roman robe on. He's got Roman like boots strapped onto his feet, and he's standing there with his hand out like he's talking to the Senate or something. But the only giveaway that it's even Etrurian art is that on the hem of his robe, in the Etrurian language, in the Etrurian alphabet, it says his name, and it says his like the name of his family and it says some stuff about him, and this is like the last kind of flip flop you see from Etrurian art becoming Roman, because I think right at 89 BCE is when Rome made their last ditch effort to kind of assimilate all the people living in Italy into the Roman Empire. They just made a big declaration saying, hey, everyone living here, you're all now Romans. Okay, we're not going to fight with you. Or I guess that was their approach. It was just kind of like they were just like, hey, we're not doing this anymore. You're just Romans now. And so then after that, it was all the Etrurian art was Roman art. All the Etrurians were Romans. So that was that at that point, Anyways, so I probably left out a bunch of stuff, but I thought there was cool stuff there. There's so much more. Oh yeah, all the things like how the Etrurians modified the Greek Doric columns, because Doric columns are usually like the plainest type of Greek column. It's just like big plain column with flutes, which are like those little indented ridges, and no base. And then the Etrurians took these for their temples, and they took away the flutes and added a base. And those are called Tuscan columns. But, and they put those on their temples. So it's like very similar, but a little bit different. Plus their columns, they didn't have to have as many of them on their temples because their roofs and all their structure wasn't as heavy, so theirs were a little bit more spaced out. And anyway, so it's just kind of cool to. I feel like in the back of my head, I'm always asking these questions like, okay, but why is that like that, and how did that get there? But every time you find out how that got there, you ask, okay, but how did that get there? So I feel like you can just keep on digging backwards endlessly, which I guess you could do if you did enough research. Anyways, thanks for listening, everyone. I don't know if this was interesting to you at all, but thanks for watching. Hope you have a good day. All right, goodbye. I pressed the wrong button.